Welcome to the debate. Late 2025, it really felt like a definitive turning point for European security, and it put Germany squarely in the spotlight over its defense strategy. The period of just, quiet strategic drift seemed to have ended, driven by global pressure, and perhaps most acutely by Chancellor Merz's, his surprisingly candid admission that Europe had been free-riding on the United States for far too long. And that sets up our central question today, which emerges directly from the material. Do the recent actions taken by Germany under Merz genuinely signify a substantive, effective transition toward independent European defense leadership? Or do they represent more politically constrained, symbolic moves that, still fundamentally depend on U.S. guarantees and are hampered by deep domestic resistance? I believe the evidence, particularly in the diplomatic action and initial reforms, it argues pretty strongly for a decisive pivot away from inertia.
Well, I come at it from a slightly different perspective. While the rhetoric from Merz is certainly assertive, you can't deny that. When you drill down into the documented implementation details, the evidence suggests that this pivot it's largely aspirational. What we see are profound political compromises, strategic inconsistencies, and a lingering critical reliance on the established U.S.-centric security architecture. For me, the constraints and the lack of a deep consensus really dilute the supposed effectiveness of this German shift, making it far from a genuine realization of independent leadership in late 2025.
Okay, but let's trace the chronology here, because I think the timing and the intention are key. The catalyst wasn't just some vague geopolitical concern. It was Merz's direct, public statement in July 2025, where he explicitly acknowledged Europe's free-riding status, and that recognition immediately translated into highly significant diplomatic action. He didn't just talk, he traveled to the UK to boost defense ties and forge what the material calls a historic friendship treaty. This isn't just friendly handshaking, this is a real alignment between two of Europe's largest economies and most capable military powers. It establishes a core leadership axis for the continent. They even detailed plans for tangible things, like a direct train link to Berlin, which sort of symbolizes this deep, long-term strategic integration. That move, it signals a proactive effort to build a credible, intra-European security structure without waiting for Washington's direction. And on top of that, Germany is tackling structural weakness head-on. Consider the November 2025 agreement on a new military service plan. This institutionally mandates all 18-year-old men to fill out a suitability questionnaire. And this is important because it proves the political will to overcome internal challenges and actively pursue NATO goals, especially that higher defense spending, which was a top priority. So the transformation is both institutional and strategically focused.
I hear the focus on the diplomatic calendar and these high-level agreements, but I'm sorry. I just don't buy that the outcome of these domestic struggles reflects the kind of genuine, unified national resolve you need for a leader. We have to look at the context of that military service plan you cited, the push to bring back compulsory service. Even in this, diluted form, it was preceded by a monumental row in October 2025 that explicitly split the German government and threw the whole plan into chaos. That isn't a minor disagreement. That's a foundational crisis of strategic consensus. The resulting policy, requiring an 18-year-old male to fill out a questionnaire, is the absolute definition of a politically compromised measure. It's designed to save face, not rapidly build military readiness. Germany is essentially trading strategic effectiveness for domestic political peace. And if the first major step toward rearmament is already so heavily watered down, how can we believe there's a serious long-term commitment to this? And moreover, on the geopolitical front, despite Merz's rhetoric, Germany's key allies, the UK specifically, were in September 2025 still intensely focused on obtaining clear U.S. backing for their efforts in Ukraine. If Europe's strongest players lack the confidence to proceed on a critical security issue without Washington's explicit blessing, well, that tells you the strategic architecture is still anchored right across the Atlantic.
I see why you emphasize the political wrangling. And yes, the disagreement was severe. But let me give you a different perspective on that November military service agreement. You're framing the political difficulty as a strategic failure, but I frame it as a crucial political victory. I mean, governing in a coalition, especially on a third-rail issue like military service, is all about navigating constraints to get to a consensus sufficient to institute a new structure. The fact remains that despite the chaos in October, the government succeeded. They agreed on a new plan in November. This plan, which mandates an introductory step, it's a concrete institutional mechanism. It creates the legal framework necessary to boost troop numbers down the line. It's a structural solution. Even if the initial step is incremental, it breaks decades of defense inertia. So it's a difficult political step forward. And I don't think we should dismiss its strategic intent just because the process was messy. It's an outcome that changes the underlying legal structure, and that's far more substantial than just rhetoric.
That's an interesting point that the outcome justifies the process, but I think you're missing the critical distinction between a political move and a genuine strategic pivot. A real pivot, it requires speed, it requires commitment. This move, forcing young men to fill out a questionnaire, it seems like a mechanism designed primarily to check a box for NATO, not to generate immediate deployable military capability. It's a solution to a political problem, the internal government split, that's just masquerading as a solution to a strategic problem, the lack of manpower. And the substance really does matter here. If this foundational domestic policy is so chaotic and results in such a compromised first step, what does that tell us about Germany's capacity for the multi-year, multi-billion euro overhaul that's actually needed to replace U.S. guarantees? I'd argue it tells us that strategic ambition is currently subordinated to internal political survival, which is the opposite of rapid, decisive leadership.
Well, I think we agree the process was difficult, but we disagree on the interpretation of its success. Let's shift focus for a moment from internal capacity to alliance dynamics, because Merz's leadership efforts extend beyond Berlin. You cite the UK's desire for clear U.S. backing, but I focus on the actions they took independent of U.S. guarantees. The UK-Germany Friendship Treaty and the strengthened defense ties in July 2025 are absolutely pivotal. This pairing, often rivals in European history, aligning so closely on defense. That shows the formation of a robust, reliable security core within Europe. And this core is designed to absorb the slack. Furthermore, the broader group of key allies, they showed strategic alignment in September by committing to support Ukraine before and after a peace deal. That shows a unified European intent where it matters most.
Wait, before you define that core, we have to look at the periphery that is simultaneously defining the total European posture. And this is where Germany's leadership potential just hits a wall. While Merz is focusing on the UK, alignment's unity is dangerously fragile. It severely limits Germany's ability to act decisively. We can't just ignore that in November 2025, Hungary's Prime Minister Orbán met with Putin and got direct praise for maintaining a balanced position on Ukraine. This clear, deep ideological divergence within the EU and NATO, coupled with continued Russian hits on Ukraine in December, it just demonstrates that European security stability is incredibly precarious. If key members are being actively praised by Moscow for undermining the defensive front, Europe cannot credibly guarantee its own security without that external architecture, the US. The leader requires followers, and until fundamental fractures like Hungary are resolved, Merz is leading a fragile coalition, not the continent as a whole.
I'm not fully convinced by that, because it allows an outlier Hungary to define the failure of the core strategic shift being led by Germany and the UK. Merz's strategy is clearly pragmatic. Build a strong, decisive security backbone first. Hungary's actions are, yes, undoubtedly a constraint on the political unity of the EU, but they don't negate the fact that the key economic and military powers are moving to create an independent, reliable security backbone for the continent. And that's exactly what a true European defense structure requires, a self-sufficient core that can stabilize the region regardless of political outliers. And we also have to acknowledge that even U.S. involvement it's undergoing a structural transformation that actually enables Merz's vision rather than suppressing it. The American role is moving from primary guarantor to strategic facilitator.
I mean, consider the critical report in August 2025. The U.S. envoy confirmed that Putin agreed in Alaska to robust security guarantees for Ukraine, explicitly called NATO-style guarantees. This U.S. brokered agreement is designed to create a mechanism that relies heavily on European commitment. It decentralizes the direct defense structure, allowing European powers, specifically Germany, to step into that guarantor role. This is the practical fulfillment of Merz's vision. Europe taking formal responsibility, it's a transition point orchestrated to allow Germany to lead.
That's a compelling argument about the intended structure. But we have to ask, what is the practical significance of these diplomatic declarations, given what's happening on the ground? Russia continued to hit Ukrainian targets in December 2025, after that report of Putin agreeing to robust guarantees. This disconnect highlights the crucial flaw in relying on declarations over actual deployable capability. Agreements on paper are just insufficient without immediate, overwhelming European military power to enforce them. If the U.S. is just facilitating a structure, who is providing the teeth? The continuing strikes suggest that Europe's confidence in its own ability to hold the line remains low. And this explains why, despite Merz's assertiveness, allies still clearly wanted clear U.S. backing. Until Germany can move beyond politically compromised domestic plans like the questionnaire and get to genuinely unified deployable policy, the U.S. remains the only practical guarantor. We are mistaking a shift in terminology for a shift in material power.
My position is that we cannot dismiss the structural changes Germany has implemented, even with the domestic resistance. The documented evidence, Merz's rhetoric, the strategic treaty with the UK, and the successful institution of a mandatory first step toward military service proves Germany is making the substantive, difficult political moves necessary to shed its free rider status and assume genuine regional leadership. The momentum is there, and the institutional framework is changing.
And my position holds that strategic reliance and these overwhelming domestic limitations still fundamentally define Germany's defense posture in late 2025. The practical outcome of political chaos over military service was a diluted policy, and the clear continued Allied demand for clear U.S. backing shows that the strategic shift remains more aspirational and rhetorical than material. The nation's security architecture remains tethered to U.S. guarantees because its own internal capacity is just lagging too far behind its stated ambition.
Ultimately, the material illuminates a critical, ongoing tension between the very high aspiration for European defense autonomy, which Chancellor Merz defined so powerfully, and the profound geopolitical and domestic realities that are constraining its swift realization.
It leaves us with the complex task of weighing the powerful evidence of German intent and diplomatic focus against the concrete difficulties of effective, unified military implementation on the ground. There is clearly much more to unpack as 2026 begins.